So, Austan and Gabriel, we've got a really important panel here. We've got central bankers from the US and Europe. So we've got two different perspectives on these super important issues we're facing. So I want to kick off with Austan. Given the disruption we've seen in energy markets from the war and the fact these might go on for a while, obviously we've seen inflation go up significantly. Are interest rate cuts, in your view, off the table this year?
Oh, geez. Okay. You got three.
Well, we've got to start. We've only got 15 minutes.
You got three deep questions on that. Are energy prices going to be lastingly higher, and for how long? That's an open question and an important question. What does that mean for rates? As you know, before there was the war, I was on the more optimistic side that there could be more than multiple rate cuts in 26. I just wanted some evidence that inflation was headed back down to 2%, that the tariff inflation was actually going to prove transitory. I think I have a little concern to pile this on top of inflation before the other one went away. That's a dangerous, slippery spot to be in. The longer this inflation disruption goes, the more likely it is, in my view, that the appropriate rate cutting would be put off. So I'm definitely going to say, if you go to the FOMC room, it's literally the biggest table that I have ever seen in my life. So I always say everything can fit on that table. I'm not taking anything off the table, but it pushes it out the longer this goes.
Okay. Gabriel, what have we learned from oil shocks in the past? We've seen in the 70s, obviously pretty profound implications for the world economy, for inflation, and mistakes that were made. You know, what should the European Central Bank be doing right now, in your view, in terms of learning from those mistakes of the past, and what should they take away?
Well, probably the single biggest difference between the 70s and where we are now is we've got an inflation target. And we're absolutely focused on delivering our 2% inflation in the medium term, which wasn't a world that we lived in before. Otherwise, we're dealing with some of the things that Austan just talked about. I mean, a supply shock that is not going to be persistent, that hasn't got a big impact, we should look through it. On the other hand, something that is going to basically take inflation off target, but not be persistent. We've got to be measured, I think, in how we respond. And something persistent that shoots us completely off target, we're going to take forceful action. So I think those are lessons that we've learned from...
But okay, but persistent, what does that mean? I mean, even if we all hug tomorrow, realistically, this disruption is going to take a while to come out of the system, isn't it? They've destroyed infrastructure, there's stuff out of place. You know, this isn't just going straight back to where it was.
No, it's not. I mean, I think we are not going back to the status quo ante. I mean, we're not going back to where we were, but I think we're still trying to understand how long is this going to last? Not just the conflict, but the impact on supply. And not just supply of oil, but actually supply of a number of other things.
Sure.
Which are affecting, which are the sorts of things that I'm sort of worried about and looking out for.
So in the 70s, maybe they made the mistake of not tightening enough and letting inflation get out of control, and Volcker had to deal with that. But you know, what is the counter risk, which is, you know, if it is purely an energy shock and you've got a target that actually, if you raise, you just simply squeeze the consumers further. They're already feeling the pain from this, and you just squeeze. So
look, you're rediscovering what you were not rediscovering. You already knew, but you're reiterating why a stagflationary shock, that is something that makes employment worse and inflation worse simultaneously, that's the worst environment that a central bank has to face, because there's not an obvious playbook of what you do. Raising rates doesn't fix the problem. Cutting rates doesn't fix the problem. And not changing rates doesn't fix the problem. So you got to, when the FOMC came up with the monetary policy framework document last year, we contemplated what would we do if we were to experience stagflationary shocks, and said, it's not a deep insight, but said, look, we'll look and see which side is worse compared to the target, and how long do we expect it to last? And that's how we'll try to think it through. I do think for the US context, there is one highly relevant thing that makes this a cousin to the 70s, but not a twin by any means, which is the US became a massive energy producer.
Absolutely.
So if this is an extended high oil price, some parts of the US economy are going to suffer. Transportation, logistics, the consumer is going to be feeling the pinch, and you will probably see some output rebounding in energy production. You probably see the investment in fracking ramp back up, and so the output impact of high oil prices is probably not as negative as in the US context as it was in the 70s.
So I'm going to come to you in a second, but just to stay with this for a second, one of the challenges the Fed has is it just made a pretty big mistake on calling 2021 transitory inflation. And so
I wasn't there, so
no,
don't blame me.
This was not, it's not personalized, but that's a real challenge because they can't make that mistake again.
More than a challenge. That's a problem. That is burned in our brain as a nation, that there are big problems with the credibility for central banks making predictions about inflation that do not come true. If you tell people we're doing nothing at this moment because inflation is about to go away, and then it doesn't go away, you must have some accountability. Your credibility took a hit. We need to be extremely careful. Anytime inflation is above the target for an extended period, you're already in a danger moment. Yeah. We've been above the target in the US for 5 straight years. In part of that time, we were making progress. So it is plausible to say we're above 2, but we're on the path back. 2025, we stalled out and stopped making progress. The argument was, yes, but that's from the tariff. That's a one and done. It's going to go away. This is why I'm afraid. If you add a big inflationary shock from energy before the other one went away, are we getting into an environment where the credibility takes a hit?
And we'll come back to the consumer in a second. We'll come to Europe in a second. But I have to ask one more question, which is, I think, important, which is, this incredibly difficult balancing act is happening at a time when the president is not shy of sharing his views on monetary policy. So what is your perspective on the risks for independence in this particularly challenging cycle?
Wouldn't you want to know what the Bank of Ireland...
We're going to this.
Look.
This is, I'm just putting you on the spot.
The Federal Reserve Act, by law, as you know, says that when the FOMC contemplates monetary policy, it's supposed to look at 2 things and 2 things only: stabilizing prices, maximizing employment. I've been at the Fed a little over 3 years now. I'm deeply impressed at the seriousness with which everyone sitting around that table takes the job. It doesn't say anything in the Federal Reserve Act about make the White House happy, make the stock market happy. There's nothing in there about that. So when there are critiques of the Fed, I try to be open to think through the arguments as much as possible. But at the end of the day, they're outside the FOMC. And that's not, the law requires us not to be responding to those things. Okay. We're supposed to be just the conditions.
So it's going to be painful, but you're just going to dig in.
There's no bad weather. There's only bad clothing. That's a storm, and we'll get the right jacket. That's our motto.
Good luck finding it. Okay. Gabriel, just to go to you. Are we going to end up with, Austan just mentioned that the US is now a very different economy. It's a net exporter of energy. It's obviously going to have some benefits and challenges from this. Europe is in a very different place. It's an importer. Could we see both sides of the Atlantic go in different directions in terms of how they approach this, do you think?
Possibly in the short term. But I mean, we started back in the end of February, we had inflation on target, we had expectations anchored, and we had our main policy rate at 2%. So we were in a different place.
Yep.
Obviously, we're in the same place right now because this energy shock is hitting everybody. But we also actually, it is worth for this audience just being clear, we've got a slightly, to paraphrase Tolstoy, all central banks are alike, but their mandates can actually be a bit different.
Yeah.
And our mandate is price stability. We haven't got a dual mandate, which the Fed has. So our mandate's very clear, price stability. And that is absolutely what we're focused on. So, I mean, it's not impossible that we're going to take slightly different paths in the short term. But in the longer term, we're playing the same game.
But to that point, if you have the situation where inflation is getting pushed up by this massive spike in energy, as you say, across fertilizer, other things as well, to what point are you willing to smash the consumer to get that back to 2% if that energy price is not going to be affected by that? Because you'd have to kill demand so aggressively to change that.
Well, we're going to have to. I mean, this is the particular tension that we've got right now, which is to make sure that we calibrate our response in a way that we don't make the problem worse. So I think in the end, understanding what is happening on the ground, understanding not only the direct effects but the indirect effects as well as the second round effects.
Yeah.
I mean, the job has become much, much more complicated. That's absolutely the case.
And it's early days, but are you seeing any sign of and I'll go to both of you on this, on the impact on the consumer? Because the consumer's already had a tough few years on inflation. So are there any early indications of how that's being felt?
No, well, right now, I think it's being felt by the fact that fuel prices at the pumps have gone up, and people are noticing that right up front. And certainly in Ireland, it's.
But are you seeing their behaviour change on the back of it as well?
Not quite, not just yet. I think it's a bit early.
What about in the US?
Look, in the US, as I say, the last 3 years plus, for all the talk about data center investment, absolutely the main driver of economic growth has been the just steady growth from the consumer rooted in low unemployment, progress. Incomes have remained growing relatively solidly, and they've been spending. If that catches cold, if that sneezes, then the economy is going to catch cold. There has been no stumble. The consumer has continued rolling along. There are a couple of cautions. One is, in history, and I said as soon as the price of oil went up, that I would not be surprised to see a significant downturn in consumer confidence. For whatever reason, people's consumer sentiment is very tied to the price of gasoline because it's a
plummeted.
Public price. And it has plummeted.
To the lowest level ever?
Like maybe ever. I don't know.
Which is kind of extraordinary.
So the question then is, will that sentiment, which is not unexpected, there's too many notes, that was expected, will that translate into they actually stop spending? If so, then there would be a danger of a stagflationary recession. So far, you haven't seen that. The consumer just keeps chugging along, and you are familiar with the breakdown between consumer sentiment and consumer spending. That's been going for 10 years.
But inflation has gone up, right?
Inflation has gone up,
and people, consumers, do not like inflation. I mean, that's
an understatement.
If there's one thing you take away, that is it. So final thing, we got 2 more minutes, and I just love it, slightly changing topic, is we're talking about inflation. some people, including I think the new Fed chair or the incoming Fed chair, should that go through smoothly and everything, talks about the sort of disinflationary impact of AI and the benefits of that. Just give a quick sense, both of you, of how significant do you see that being? Is that a big force?
I mean, personally, I'm one of these people who is slightly skeptical about the hype, but the reality that I'm also seeing is it's making some pretty impressive, I mean, just within my own bank, the speed at which some things can now be done compared to what is transformational. But I think I think there's a bit too much hype about productivity and job losses, because I think there might in the short term, we might see that. But I also anticipate that once we start creating new jobs off the back of that, there might be a slightly different picture. But that's my own view right now.
Final word?
I think productivity's up a bit in the US. I'm skeptical that it can be explained by AI so far, because AI adoption hasn't been big enough. There is one force going the other way to consider, which is if a bunch of the payoff from AI is to come in the future, and that's driving up valuations now, that people are going and spending out of this wealth that is premised on there's going to be huge benefits in the future. Let's just remember, you can overheat the economy in the short run. And the opposite of reducing the rates, you might have to raise the rates so that you don't overheat it right now. And I hesitate to call it a bubble because of the inner University of Chicago in me, but those issues of boom and bust and valuations and spending out of what's going to be future bounty, we better pay attention.
So do you think there's an AI bubble in terms of... No, well, you've mentioned the word.
That's what I said.
I wasn't going to talk about it, but...
There are high valuations, and...
I more mean the investment and the valuations.
Yes,
and if you put the two together...
If we find out that a la 2000, 2001, that the growth rate of the internet was going to end up being 10% per year, not 30% per year. That's still a very strong growth rate, but it meant in the short term, we got way overbuilt in capital. That is conceivable. That same thing could happen. Whether you call that a bubble or not, it's a boom-bust cycle that...
So that was sort of a soft yes.
I'm not, don't ever let the smart guy put words in your mouth.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed.